Hello, my friend. This is Clyde. Who is with you today? Genesis 39 verses 9 through to 23 says, "When his master heard the story his wife told him, saying, 'This is how your slave treated me,' he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did." A young man ends up in prison for a crime he did not commit. How could that happen in a country that was civilized enough to have a monarchy in place, a country that is one of the world's oldest civilizations, a country that very likely had a strong and modern economy? Joseph was never tried in a court of law. He was never given his day in a court before a jury of his peers. Well, someone might argue that he was a slave and one from a foreign country. Can you see some human rights organization protesting on his behalf? Let's put that aside and focus on a little statement that is repeated in our text. The first instance goes like this: "But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him." Interesting statement, don't you think? We will come back to that. The next statement says, "The Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did." What is so significant about the Lord being with Joseph? Let us dive into the story. Bear in mind that this was thousands of years ago. There was no Bible as we know it. In fact, there was no 10 Commandments. So what was the moral compass that Joseph lived by? Joseph was a Hebrew, a descendant of Abraham. Abraham was a friend of God, a man of faith, and the patriarch of the Hebrew people. Could it be that while Joseph was growing up with his 11 other brothers back in Canaan, that their father Jacob taught his family about the Lord? And what would those lessons consist of? Because, as I say, there was no Bible that they could consult, and the 10 Commandments were not yet given. One thing we know from early in his life is that he seemed different. He had 2 strange dreams when he was 17 that suggested that a day was coming that his siblings and parents would bow before him. Weird, don't you think? This led to a strange twist in his life. His brothers were jealous of the relationship with Joseph and his father, he being Jacob's favorite child. So in a bizarre twist of sibling rivalry, they sold their young brother to some Ishmaelites, who then took him to this foreign country, Egypt, and sold him into slavery. Human trafficking, if you ask me. Joseph was a slave in the home of one of Egypt's noble family, and an interesting line shows up at the beginning of his tenure as a slave with Potiphar. "The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master." Who is the Lord? And how did this relationship with these 2 come about? Let's leave it there for now. Joseph, a young man with no experience as a household worker, soon became the head slave in this home. I mean, not only did he excel at this menial task of being a slave, but his master was so impressed with him, not enough to set him free, but good enough to put Joseph in charge of everything in that home except the food he ate. And again we read, "From the time he put him in charge of his household and all of that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph." The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. Then it happened. Joseph ran into trouble with his boss's wife. Joseph had sex appeal, and Mrs. Potiphar wanted this young man so badly to sleep with her. Joseph respectfully refused to give in to her taunts. Why did he reject her offer, bearing in mind that there was no 8th commandment which says, "You shall not commit adultery"? So what determined this moral compass that Joseph seemed to be living by? After all, you're in charge of everything in Potiphar's house, my friend, so why not take advantage of your position and sleep with his wife? That's a badge of honor. Well, let's hear from Joseph himself. But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Don't miss it. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? There was something inside of Joseph that was bigger than life itself. He had no Bible to tell him, flee youthful lusts, no eighth commandment that speaks against adultery. This was the perfect opportunity to have this secret sex alliance with your boss's wife. Bragging rights, if you ask me. But Joseph said, I cannot do this wicked thing and sin against God. She kept on trying. She even set things in place for no one to be home one day. And that time, Joseph ran out of the bedroom suite, leaving his coat behind. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. She went for the jugular. She told her husband that Joseph tried to rape her, and when she screamed, he ran out and left the evidence behind. His coat. Joseph was thrown into prison by his angry boss, Potiphar. Yes, he landed in prison for a crime he did not commit. Can you imagine when he tells some of the other prisoners what crime he had committed, that they laughed him to scorn? Some guys would give anything for such an experience, but not this Hebrew man turned slave in Egypt. Now we come back to the text, the moment of truth. Joseph was normal like you and me, but there was something distinctive about him. The Lord was with him. The Lord showed up on his behalf when he was first sold as a slave to Potiphar. The Lord made him prosper in the most adverse circumstances he had ever faced. In fact, the Lord was so with Joseph that Potiphar's house was blessed because the Lord was with Joseph. Then he was thrown into prison. From slavery to prison, it doesn't get any worse than that. This Hebrew man was now a common prisoner in a foreign country. But here we see the Lord was with him, and he experienced great favor with the warden. What is going on? The warden made him assistant warden, a trusted assistant, because the Lord was with him, and Joseph succeeded in his adversities. Let us land this plane. The presence of God with Joseph is a statement that Joseph not only learned about the Lord from his father, but he had a relationship with God himself. That is God's favorite thing, to have a relationship with you and with me. Joseph did not have the benefit of church. He did not have a Bible to read from, but he had a heart for God, the God his father taught him about. And look at it again. God was with him at the times when he was in greatest needs. When everything was going wrong, God was with him and blessed him. Do you know the Lord? Do you know Joseph's Lord? The one who blessed him while he was a slave, the one who blessed him while he was in prison for a crime he did not commit. Do you know the Lord of whom Joseph insisted he could not sleep with his boss's wife and sin against God? If you serve that Lord, if you choose to live by that God's influence, it will be worth it in the end. Many years later, Joseph's dreams came true, but hear what he said to his brothers on that occasion. Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. The God of Joseph, my friend, wants to have relationship with you. He was with Joseph thousands of years ago, and he wants to be with you today. Invite him into your life today.